The clock in the Bennett's kitchen ticked past 9 as the kettle cooled on the counter. A thin ribbon of steam curled upward, dying in the dim yellow light. Claire Bennett's cup of tea sat half-finished beside her open notebook. A few words scribbled on the page before the pen rolled off the table. The chair was pushed back slightly as if she had stood up mid-thought. Outside, Briar Ridge slept under a curtain of fog. The street lamps flickered in uneven rhythm, washing the narrow lanes in a pale, trembling glow. Claire's trainers made no sound against the wet pavement. She often walked to calm her nerves after marking papers. Yet that night, her stride carried a restless urgency. A lone car passed, its headlights cutting through the mist, and then the town swallowed her whole. Inside the Bennett's house, Mark sat before the muted television. His reflection ghosted across the dark window. He texted her twice, waited, then called. No answer. He tried again an hour later, pacing. When he finally lay down, the bed felt cavernous. At dawn, he phoned the police, his voice measured, almost rehearsed. Detective Olivia Harris arrived before sunrise. She found the kitchen as Claire had left it, still ordinary, unsettlingly domestic. Harris noticed the tea, the open notebook, the absence of any real struggle. Neighbors gathered outside, whispering. One recalled a sharp argument days earlier, muffled through the walls. Another mentioned the small silver key Claire always wore around her neck, saying it opened her private diary. No one had ever seen inside it. Mark told the detective that Claire often walked when she needed to think. He spoke of their happy marriage, their quiet routines. Yet his answers came too easily, his eyes darting to the floor whenever he mentioned her name. Harris felt something beneath the calm, something cold. As night returned, she searched Claire's study once more. A faint perfume lingered in the air, and the drawers were neatly arranged, almost staged. Then in the top drawer, she found a small velvet pouch containing the diary key, but no diary. The silence thickened as she closed the drawer. The missing pages had already begun to speak. By morning, the story of Claire Bennett's disappearance had spread across every screen in Briar Ridge. On the local news, Mark Bennett sat beneath studio lights, his voice trembling as he begged for his wife's safe return. His eyes glistened, his tone measured, and every word sounded like something carefully practiced. The audience saw a grieving husband. Detective Harris saw a performance. At first glance, Mark was everything respectable. A financial advisor, active in the parish council, always the first to volunteer for charity events. His neighbors described him as courteous and devoted, the sort of man who held doors open and remembered birthdays. Yet when Harris began her interviews, fragments of a different picture emerged. A college friend recalled a night years ago when Mark smashed a mirror after an argument. Another remembered the way he spoke about control, how love should come with rules. In the sterile glow of the interrogation room, Mark clasped his hands tightly as the camera recorded every twitch. The fluorescent light carved deep shadows beneath his eyes. "Tell me the last thing your wife said before she left," Harris asked. He hesitated for half a second too long. She said she was going for a walk to clear her head. She was upset about something at school. What was she upset about? I don't remember, he replied, forcing a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. She watched him fold and unfold his fingers, a rhythm of anxiety or guilt. His version of events stayed rigidly neat, yet the timing was off. He claimed Claire left at 8:30, but the neighbor's security camera caught movement at nearly 10. When Harris asked about their marriage, he gave a politician's answer. Perfect, peaceful, happy. Later that evening, as his televised plea replayed in slow motion, Harris paused at a single frame. His eyes shifted to the side just before tears appeared. It wasn't grief. It was calculation. She returned to the Bennett's house that night, stepping into the chill of the basement. Dust hung in the air, faintly disturbed. A single camera tripod stood near the wall, its cable coiled neatly beside an empty socket. Detective Harris returned to the school where Claire Bennett had taught English literature for nearly a decade. The classroom smelled faintly of chalk and lavender disinfectant, the kind teachers used to erase years of fingerprints from desks. Her handwriting still covered the whiteboard, a quote from Jane Eyre about freedom and fire. The pupils' essays sat in a neat pile marked with red ink, each comment kind but distant, as though written by someone already halfway gone. A teaching assistant mentioned that Claire had kept a small metal box in her desk, always locked, never opened in front of anyone. When Harris pried open the bottom drawer, she found a brass key wrapped in tissue paper. It bore a small engraving, "Private." Back at the Bennett's home, the detective followed her instinct. In Claire's study, behind a row of books, the light caught on a sliver of uneven wood. She pressed her thumb against it. A panel shifted, revealing a hidden drawer lined in velvet. Inside lay a bundle of torn pages tied with black ribbon. They were fragments of a diary. Sentences trailing into dread, dates marked with jagged ink. "He watches even when he's sorry. I forgive him because he says I make him better. He said the room helps him think." Each line breathed unease. Harris noticed recurring references to something called the Red Room. There were hints of punishment, silence, apologies that felt rehearsed. The words carried both affection and terror, the twisted heartbeat of emotional captivity. She placed the fragments under the desk lamp, watching the ink shimmer faintly crimson as if reacting to memory. Her gloved fingers brushed over the last page. It was stained, the handwriting unsteady, the pen having pressed too hard into the paper. "If he finds out about—" The sentence stopped abruptly, mid-thought, ending in a tear. The remaining space was blank, heavy with whatever she had meant to confess. Harris leaned back, eyes drawn to the faint red light blinking from the hallway security sensor. It pulsed against the wall like a warning, rhythmic, deliberate, alive. The name was written in the diary margins, scrawled beside a date marked with a circle. Evan. No surname, just the single word. Deliberate, secretive, dangerous. Detective Harris cross-checked the school's faculty list and found him. Evan Caro, an art instructor who had joined 2 years earlier. Quiet, reserved. The kind of man who avoided confrontation yet saw everything. When Harris arrived at his flat, Evan was already waiting. His hands trembled as he poured coffee into mismatched mugs. The living room was a clutter of canvases, each one painted in muted tones, faces blurred as if unfinished. He looked exhausted, guilt etched into the pale lines beneath his eyes. "She told me things weren't right," he said, voice barely audible. She'd smile at work, but when no one was watching, her hands would shake. "I thought she was ill until she said it was fear." Harris leaned forward. "Fear of what, Mr. Caro?" He hesitated. Of him. Of what he'd do if she ever left. Evan pulled out his phone, unlocking it with hesitant fingers. On the screen glowed a message from Claire, time-stamped 21:04, just hours before she vanished. "It's finally over tonight." The words felt heavier than any confession. "She said she'd tell him everything," Evan whispered. She wanted to be free. The detective studied him. His grief felt real, but grief often did. She asked where he'd been that night. He claimed he was home painting until midnight. No one could confirm it. As she left, the evening light sliced through the blinds, striping his face like prison bars. Back at the station, Harris ran a quick location check on his phone records. The data came back within minutes, numbers flickering across her monitor. Her pulse quickened as the coordinates settled on one familiar address, the Bennett's home, less than an hour after Claire's message. Detective Harris no longer trusted the polished quiet that wrapped around the Bennett's home. Secrets clung to the walls like mold. A neighbor mentioned a locked structure behind the garden, something Mark never let anyone near, not even Claire. The information sent Harris and her team through the overgrown hedges to a small storage shed, secured with a rusted padlock on the outside. Locked rooms were rarely about safety. They were about containment. The moment the door creaked open, dust spiraled into the torchlight, revealing a chamber painted head to toe in suffocating crimson. The walls were padded with squares of dark foam, soundproofing every scream, every sob, every apology. An empty camera tripod stood at the center of the room, its legs spread like an accusation. No camera, no evidence of blood or violence, yet the air tasted stale and frightened. Harris felt her pulse rise as the beam of her flashlight caught something glinting near the corner. Claire's pendant rested on the floor, its chain tangled as though torn away. She knelt to pick it up, recognizing from photos the tiny silver charm inscribed with the letter C. It was the sort of gift a husband gives a wife to claim her as his. Mark insisted the room was part of his photography hobby when confronted. He said he once filmed short creative projects and had simply abandoned the idea. He smiled with the wobble of a man caught in a lie, his palms sweating as he tried to explain away the padded walls. Harris thought of the diary fragments locked behind velvet. Claire had written of nightmares, of a red light flashing like judgment, of apologies demanded rather than earned. She had mentioned tapes, recordings that made her skin crawl, punishments wrapped in affection. The neighbors spoke of nightly arguments. Evan spoke of fear. The basement camera was unplugged, now this. Every clue pointed to a man who needed control the way others needed oxygen. Back at the station, the investigation room felt colder than usual. A small parcel awaited Harris on the evidence table. No stamp, no sender. Inside lay a single USB tape labeled with Claire's initials. The handwriting was unmistakable. The evidence room was silent except for the hum of the old monitor. Detective Harris pressed play. The screen flickered, washed in static, then stabilized into the blurred black and white image of a woman sitting under harsh light. Claire Bennett. Her hair clung to her cheeks, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. A man's voice filled the speakers, low, steady, rehearsed. "Try again," Mark Bennett said off camera. "You're not saying it right." Claire's lips trembled. "Please, Mark, I can't do this anymore." "Then you'll never get better," he replied. We agreed this was therapy. He stepped briefly into frame, his face a ghost in monochrome. Every movement was deliberate, every word dripping with control. He instructed her to repeat lines from a script, phrases about obedience and forgiveness. Between takes, he offered comfort, brushing her hair from her face, whispering apologies that sounded like commands. The footage felt less like art and more like evidence of a private religion where he was both savior and judge. Harris watched, jaw clenched. The timestamps showed the recordings took place weeks before Claire vanished. Each file captured the same ritual. Humiliation followed by remorse. A performance of dominance dressed as devotion. When Mark was brought in for questioning, she played the footage without a word. The room filled with the faint buzz of static and the echo of his own cruelty. He stared at the screen, eyes locked on the image of his wife. No outrage, no denial, only stillness. His knuckles turned white against the metal table. "She wanted help," he muttered at last. "I was helping her face herself." Harris paused the video. "She was terrified of you." He looked up, the thin smile gone. "She needed me." The air thickened, tension curling between truth and delusion. When Harris left the room to prepare an arrest warrant, Mark sat alone, motionless. By the time officers returned, the chair was empty, the door propped open by a folded page from Claire's diary. Rain lashed against the station windows as Detective Harris examined the folded diary page Mark had left behind. The paper smelled faintly of smoke, the ink smeared in places where fingers had pressed too hard. Forensics confirmed what instinct already knew. It was Claire's handwriting, dated the same night she disappeared. The words were uneven, urgent, and painfully intimate. "Evan, if you're reading this, I did what I had to. Don't hate me." The message wasn't a confession. It was a farewell. And the mention of Evan pulled the investigation in a direction no one expected. Harris traced the paper's watermark to a stationery shop near Langmuir Lake, a secluded area 40 minutes from Briar Ridge. According to records, a cabin there had been rented a month earlier under the name Anna Lister. Payment in cash. The handwriting on the rental form matched Claire's. By dawn, the detective and her team stood at the edge of the lake. Mist crawled low over the water, turning the cabin into a ghostly silhouette. The door hung open, creaking in the wind. Inside, the air carried the metallic scent of ash and damp wood. Scattered across the floor were fragments of charred paper, pages half consumed, words bleeding into blackened edges. One line remained clear enough to read, "It wasn't supposed to end this way." On the desk sat the remains of a burned leather journal, its spine cracked but still faintly embossed with Claire's initials. A broken locket lay beside it, the photograph inside burned away. Harris bagged everything for evidence, but her attention froze on a coffee cup resting by the window, still faintly warm. Forensics later confirmed traces of 2 sets of DNA inside the cabin. One belonged to Claire. The other, however, did not belong to Mark Bennett. It matched neither Evan nor any known associate. The unknown profile carried a familial marker, a blood tie. As Harris stood by the lake, the morning light caught on the surface of the water, revealing a faint ripple as if something beneath had just moved. The case was no longer about a husband and wife. It was about lineage, identity, and a truth buried deeper than the lake itself. The DNA results arrived under a sky that looked bruised. Detective Harris stood in the evidence room, the faint hum of fluorescent lights echoing through the silence. The report trembled slightly in her hands as she read the name at the bottom of the analysis. Amelia Ward. A woman with no criminal record, no address in Briar Ridge, and no known connection to Mark Bennett. Until the birth certificates came, Claire Bennett and Amelia Ward shared the same mother. Different fathers. Half-sisters separated in childhood. One raised in comfort, the other in foster care. Their paths had crossed only months before Claire vanished, when Amelia joined a local charity that Mark supported. The diaries filled in the rest. Every secret Claire had written became a weapon. Every apology a clue. Claire's entries turned darker near the end. She had uncovered the affair between Mark and Amelia, first as suspicion, then as fact. The final complete entry read, "He said she was nothing like me, but he looked at her the same way he once looked at me." Maybe that's the point. When she confronted them, the argument became a storm of betrayal and revelation. Neighbors recalled raised voices, the sound of glass shattering. What happened next was reconstructed through the fragments Claire left behind. Her pendant torn from her neck, her diary pages sealed and hidden, her car abandoned near the woods. Mark and Amelia had worked together to erase her, but Claire had anticipated them. The letters she mailed to herself, disguised as diary fragments, were posted days before her disappearance. Each parcel arrived in sequence after she was declared missing, guiding investigators through her own life like breadcrumbs toward truth. A year later, Detective Harris closed the file marked Bennett, Claire. No body was ever found. The final camera footage from Langmere Station showed a woman with cropped hair boarding a northbound train under the name Anna Lister. Her expression was unreadable, her left hand bare where the ring once sat. The diary now sat sealed in an evidence bag on Harris's desk, its pages curling slightly with age. Rain tapped against the window as she read the last line one more time, the ink faint but unbroken. Everyone thought she was the victim, but maybe in the end she just wrote her own escape.